Welcome back. Now, government has extended its ban on scrap metal exports by 6 more months in an attempt to combat theft and vandalism of public infrastructure. The theft and export of copper cables have been severely impacted, or rather have severely impacted the economy, and have also significantly contributed to power cuts and disruptions on rail lines. Now, according to a notice published in the Government Gazette, Trade and Industry Minister Ebrahim Patel also ordered the International Trade and Administration Commission of South Africa not to accept or process any applications for export permits for ferrous and non-ferrous waste and scrap metal. So for a reaction to these latest developments, we joined now virtually by the CEO of XA Global Trade Advisors, Donald Mackay. Donald, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning.
So let me first gauge your reaction to the latest measures taken by government extending this ban on scrap metal exports by another 6 months.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to do anything to accomplish the goal of reducing the infrastructure theft. So I simply think it's the wrong action to be taking. It'll create economic harm, but I doubt it'll change anything around the theft issues, which is our primary concern, I would think.
So why do you believe then that this will not change anything? Because if we look at what's happening across the country, and these things are actually visible to everyone just traveling on our roads, how the infrastructure is being vandalized, stolen. Why do you think that this extension will make no difference? Are you therefore suggesting as well that it hasn't made any significant impact?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. So I don't think anyone feels like the theft of infrastructure has dropped. We have very little hard data which has been provided to be able to say what difference has been made. So it would appear as if we're doing something that didn't work last time and now we're doing it a second time.
So looking at the problem that we faced with in the country, though, Donald, and I'm sure you're aware as we're speaking of, the theft of scrap metal, we're talking about copper cable theft, and the impact of that is acutely felt by all South Africans. And if you think about the fact that scrap metal, the trade therein is actually legitimate in this country, why is it then so difficult to track the illegal trade and export of these?
Well, probably for a few reasons. Firstly, criminals are deliberately trying to hide what they're doing. So, that would in itself be difficult. The copper exports in the form of scrap have essentially not been happening since 2017. So the idea that we can ban a product that essentially was never being exported is problematic. This doesn't mean the copper is not leaving the country, but for the ban to work, it would assume that the copper is either being accurately declared to customs, which clearly doesn't seem to be the case, or it's leaving in another form. And we do know, for example, that the ban on copper does not extend to copper, scrap copper that has been melted down. So if you take the copper, melt it into a block or shred it in some way, so that it's no longer traceable as scrap, then that is permitted to be traded. And I would think at least that some of the problem might reside there. So
what would you suggest then, Donald, could be a possible solution to the problem?
Yes, I think there are a few things. The one is we immediately have to stop the trade of scrap metal for cash, which is something government has been aware of for a very long time, but has done nothing to attend to. Illegal connections. It's probably unlikely that the people making the illegal connections to the Eskom network are buying their cable legitimately. So that would seem to be yet another problem. So I think those sorts of actions would go a far greater way to solving the problem than it would to ban a product which in its stolen form has not been exported for a very long time through legitimate channels.
So, Donald, you say that South Africa needs to prohibit the trade of scrap for cash. So how is that going to assist us? And also, when will those within your industry who are doing this, actually take responsibility for their wrongdoing in this particular matter?
Yeah, so I'm an advisor to the industry. I'm not in the scrap metal industry, to be clear. So I think, of course, there are criminals without a doubt in the sector, and some of them are being arrested, and this is a very good thing. But to kind of focus on just one part of the chain, and I'm not suggesting that there isn't a problem there, but it certainly is not the whole of the problem. And so if we're only going to be looking at one chunk of this, we have 3,000 roughly registered scrap dealers in South Africa. That's a huge number of companies. We have no registrations, for example, of where furnaces are located. So if I have a copper melting furnace, I don't have to register that. It becomes very difficult for the police to know where all of these furnaces are, for example. We have no central registration system for scrap recyclers. So if a scrap dealer was doing a transaction with another person in the value chain, they have no way to determine if that is a legitimate company or not. The licenses are still handwritten by the police. So it's incredibly difficult for the industry to make a positive contribution when the process of the government administering the scrap and sharing information is simply so difficult to work with.
So, obviously then law enforcement is part of the problem here in terms of not being able to enforce the laws in a very meaningful way. But again, and this is a problem why I suppose most lay South Africans will look at this ban and the extension of it, Donald, and say it's a good thing. Because if I wake up in the morning and my tap is gone, I wake up and, a manhole cover down my street is gone. And so many other things that, criminals just steal. And these things just find their way. They're finding their way to someone, somewhere in that value chain who's buying all of this stuff. So, most South Africans will look at this and not be very sympathetic towards the dealers at this point in terms of this ban. How do you then try to impress upon the lay public that this is not a good thing, and for which reasons?
Well, quite simply, if the ban worked, in other words, we saw a drop in the theft, then it would be very hard to argue with the thinking. But in fact, there's been no correlation between the two. So the idea that we want to ban it because we're angry with people doesn't make any sense. I mean, all of us have to live in a state where our electricity is off more than it should be because somebody has stolen some cable. The problem is, if the action we're taking is not achieving the goal, then we're not fixing the theft problem. We're just creating a different set of problems. And if the theft problem was being abated by the export ban, then I struggle to understand why it is that government is refusing to release the data that would support that. And certainly my experience in most South Africans, I'm assuming has not been that the theft of infrastructure is diminishing. If anything, it seems to be increasing.
And that's the interesting part. And I was hoping that we would get government on to give us their side of the story, because, you saying that this has made no difference, this ban. And I would love to hear from government, what their view is on this. But just very briefly, Donald, before I let you go, in terms of scrap metal, how much of that, how do we use it, firstly, in the country, very briefly, and how much of it is actually exported in one form or another?
Yeah, so that's a hard question to answer because there are many different types of scrap. But this ban covers copper and covers scrap steel. And so steel would be used in South Africa. It would be melted down and it would be turned into things like rebar, reinforcing wire, that kind of thing for the construction industry, or it would be exported in that form. Copper, there's less of a domestic market to utilize copper. And so it appears as if the copper, most of it would be exported. But like I said, the minute the copper gets melted down into a block, you can export it without constraint. So if we look at the exports of copper compared to the amount that is exported in its kind of native form, so just scrap metal as it is, versus in blocks, the amount of copper exported as scrap has diminished to almost zero.
Right.
But the exports of these copper blocks have grown tremendously over the last 10 years.
We have to leave it there. Thanks so much for your time this morning. CEO of XA Global Trade Advisors, Donald Mackay, speaking about government extending its ban on scrap metal exports by another 6 months. Always free to tell us your views at Morning Live SABC.